Tonight's event brings together this well-renowned experts in the field and an impressive lineup. We have joining us this evening Steve Gaines, the Dean of the Brands School at UCSB. We have Craig Shields, editor of 2 Green Energy and CleanEnergyPress.com. We have Phil Graves, Director of Corporate Development at Patagonia, and Mark Hines, Director of Sustainability at Sonos. You're going to have the opportunity tonight to hear successes, how an entrepreneurship program within the environmental school at UCSB is being successful, how markets are making clean energy and the deal of the century driving upheaval in the energy industry, how Patagonia is investing in sustainability, and then some first-hand examples on successful sustainability programs. Say that fast 3 times. So we're going to start tonight with our keynote speaker. We're so happy to have Steve Gaines, Dean of the Brands School at UCSB.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you all for coming. But what I want to spend most of my time talking about is a different form of this problem, which is really thinking about launching new companies where the primary motivation for the company from the beginning is actually solving environmental problems. So there are certainly components of the operations that really need to be taken into account sustainability practices that you're going to hear a lot about from the colleagues that are going to be talking afterwards. But there's also the opportunity, I think, for actually using companies to come up with private enterprise solutions to a whole diverse array of environmental problems. If we think about a lot of ocean problems, one of the classic ones that I've done a lot of work on is fishing, and particularly overfishing. That if we overfish a stock in the ocean, it's a perfect example of a situation where if you fix that problem, you get 3 wins. You get to catch more fish, you get more fish in the ocean, and you make more money. So by coming up with solutions that can actually drive all 3 of those, you get a much broader audience and interested in actually utilizing those kinds of solutions. If all we do is come up with solutions that lead to more fish in the ocean, but don't increase catch or don't increase profits, those are much harder to sell. And so we came up with an alternative way for students to do their master's thesis. Instead of the traditional master's thesis we do, which is a team of students working with a client to solve a problem, and I'll talk about some of those a little bit later, we put it on as an option that if you've got an idea for solving an environmental problem in a way that can make money, you can get your master's thesis by working on developing the business model for how that new venture could actually be successful, with the ultimate goal that we actually launch these ventures and really go solve these problems. So the timing was good from the standpoint of developing of new approaches that we were able to embrace in a very powerful way. And the other thing that actually helped us was that we didn't have a business school at UCSB. I think if we would have had a business school, all we would do is just say, if you're interested in that thing, go take some classes at the business school, and then you figure out some way to integrate these together. We had to actually think about how we can put these together in a really interesting way and integrate the innovations that the students get from thinking about environmental problems in new ways with the kind of entrepreneurial skills that it takes to really be able to launch new ventures. And we were able to partner with the technology management program in the College of Engineering to be able to leverage some of the things that they were doing very well over there as well. Okay, so a big part of this approach is really thinking about the customer discovery, finding the customer problem that you're trying to solve as a part of your new business. And that involves a lot of analysis, and the thing that I really liked about it is it involves a lot of field research on the part of the students to go out and actually talk to potential customers about what is it that your new venture is actually going to solve, so you actually have a market that might be interested in what you're going to produce. And so on average, the teams here involved in this process do something on the order of about 100 interviews with a diverse array of customers as a part of their business model development. And the other thing that's really critical about this kind of changing approach to entrepreneurship that was happening about the same time is that a lot of times people come into starting new ventures with a solution in mind, as opposed to with a problem to be solved in mind. And then Salty Girl Seafood, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute here in terms of some of the impacts they've had in terms of transforming opportunities within the sustainable seafood situation. The motivation here was from the fact that studies have shown that, and several of the Salty Girls are actually in the room here, so you might want to talk to them sometime. But the motivation is that when you go to a restaurant and buy seafood, a recent study a few years ago showed that there was like a 1/3 chance that what you're eating is not what they tell you it was. Coming back, I just want to highlight one other thing on Salty Girl Seafood. I mean, one of the things that I talked about is this analysis. It really involves a lot of pivoting in the development of these new venture plans. And Salty Girl Seafood's a perfect example where they did a lot of interesting ideas in the first place, but they were thinking about it in the context of taking sustainable seafood that's traceable and selling it to high-end chefs that are really focused on sustainable products. What they've found is that there's also a gigantic consumer market for this, in fact, a much bigger consumer market, and so they've pivoted in a lot of their business now to have a much broader audience in terms of enhancing the impact of their program by being able to go for sustainable products with both frozen and smoked products. The other thing we've really learned from this is that this process is really good in terms of training students to be entrepreneurial thinkers, even if their career path doesn't involve starting new ventures. And several have been incredibly successful going out of this program where they developed new business plan ideas and moving into existing companies and playing really important roles within the kind of sustainability changes that are happening within so many companies you're going to hear about. I mean, so a couple of examples. Alex Sylvester from Forget Me Not is now the corporate I'm drawing a blank on the name. Corporate Social Responsibility Director at Mattel. Carolyn Cochran from SunShares, one of the other ones, is the Sustainability Manager at Sam's Club, and she's now the Senior Manager for Renewable Power and Energy Efficiency for all of Walmart. But Eli Lilly, focusing on the risk associated with the fact that their pharmaceuticals depend upon a very large supply of water in a world where water supply is changing in very large ways from one place to the next. So the students came up with a really innovative way of helping Eli Lilly think through this problem of reducing water use and reducing water risk. Us and a group of students worked with them to think about really transforming the whole way they think about their food purchases from the standpoint of enhancing the sustainability impacts that they would have as a company which is a gigantic purchaser of a whole variety of different foods. We've done a number of projects with Patagonia over the years. This one is focusing on kind of the land use implications of different kinds of choices the company might make and how they could be reducing the land use transformations, whether it's converting forests into cotton farms or things along these lines, minimizing those kinds of impacts from different kinds of choices. So doing a really detailed analysis on how you minimize land use impacts. We worked with Deckers Corporation on a project in terms of the water implications of a variety of sourcing choices that they make in terms of production of shoes that also had a very big impact in terms of thinking about a lot of their practices. And so that's kind of a quick overview of how we're trying to operate in this space, really kind of two classes of solutions. One, like these, where we're thinking about how we can bring new kinds of analytical approaches in partnership with companies that really want to look deeply at some of the sustainability options within their company. In every single one of these cases, the answers come up with solutions that are significant cost savings for the company, and as well as reducing a variety of environmental impacts. And it's that win-win kind of opportunity that really is the basis for the first part I talked about, that the opportunity for starting new ventures where the major focus from the beginning is solving environmental problems. So thank you very much.
Next, we have Craig Shields. He's the editor of 2 Green Energy and CleanEnergyPress.com. Craig, nice to have you.
So the bad news is that Americans don't care very much about this. So 75% of people say they would pay more for eco-friendly products, but in actual practice, less than 3% actually do. So, and this, what I would argue is that especially in America, and to a lesser degree elsewhere, we have a cultural mismatch for this thing. So we're regarding ocean acidification and climate change and loss of biodiversity, which is happening over an enormous span of time. And Americans, they want to see something different every couple of days. So we just don't have a good cultural match for the lifelong battle that we need to fight here. I grant that almost all corporations are doing a wonderful job at some level and some sincere level in terms of turning things around. Nobody doubts that there's better treatment of employees, attention to abuses in the supply chains, et cetera. But still, it's not sustainable. We're dumping 300 million tons of plastic a year into landfills in our oceans. And we're still experiencing exponential growth of resource extraction, consumption, and disposal. There's a moral limit, too, in addition to the physical limit. The LIBOR price-fixing scandal affects $500 trillion of financial instruments. There are 16 banks facing $35 billion worth of criminal and civil penalties. And let me close with this. Where will it end? Well, first of all, despite what I've just said for the last 10 minutes, I'm actually extremely excited about this and overall optimistic about it. There are more than 200,000 groups on the planet right now as we speak whose purpose is environmental justice. It's an enormous amount of horsepower. If I put one of these things up, one of the names of these groups up every second, it would take more than 3 days. We'd be here for more than 3 days reading them. It's just an enormous amount of horsepower. Some of these come from huge organizations. The Sierra Club has 4 or 5 million members. Its campaign called Beyond Coal has brought tens of millions of Americans to the realization of what's going on with coal vis-a-vis oxides of nitrogen and sulfur, heavy metals, radioactive isotopes. So that's a big one. Not so huge groups include mine. Two Green Energy. If you want to go online, there's tons and tons of content there. There's 7,000 blog posts and everything else you can name.
Hi, everybody. Well, Phil Graves, before my time at Patagonia, I worked for one of the big global consulting firms. My background is in finance, investing, and when I was at one of the big consulting firms, I advised my clients, whether they were corporations or private equity shops, on how they could maximize their financial return. And as a finance geek, it was really interesting because I love financial theory and maximizing return was interesting to me. But you spend so much of your life at work, I kept always coming back to the fact that there's got to be more to your life than this, especially if you spend so much of it at work. And I was really struggling with that for years as a consultant. I'm a father of 3 little girls. My wife and I love taking backpacking, love the wilderness and wild places. And that's what ultimately drew me to Patagonia. And being able to work for a company that prioritizes people, whether they be the employees of Patagonia, whether they be the employees of partners in their supply chain that actually make the Patagonia gear, or the planet in terms of a sustainable business model. Prioritizing all those things alongside the profit, which is what you have to be a viable business and pay your employees to make the Patagonia gear. To me, that was what drew me to land at Patagonia. And what I'll spend most of my time talking about today is another initiative that we launched in 2013, which is what I oversee, and that is 20 million and change, and that's our venture capital investment arm. And the person over the last 2 years that I've heard describe it the best is actually my 4-year-old daughter, Ruby. And so she'll tell her little friends at the preschool that my dad gives Patagonia's money to companies that are good to the earth. And to me, that's just total justification. That was the right move, to come to Patagonia and work at a place where I can be proud of what I do. My kids get it even at 4 years old. And it's been incredibly rewarding and enriching professionally. So a bit more about 20 million change, to elaborate on Ruby's point. I can't just leave it at giving companies money that are good to the earth. The heart of 20 Million Change is to invest in companies whose business model provides a direct, positive environmental benefit. So going back to our mission, to the heart of Yvon Chouinard's mission of using business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. So that's Patagonia's mission, and those are the companies that we look to align ourselves with on the investment side through 20 Million Change. We will prioritize investments in our own supply chain. So we target food, water, energy, waste, and apparel. But the ones in our supply chain, whether it be the outdoor apparel supply chain, where we can make a jacket with less water, with less energy, use a bio-based material for a feedstock as opposed to a petrochemical one, those are the ones that we prioritize. Another way that we're different is that we fundamentally believe that models like a traditional venture capital firm that maximizes shareholder value above all else, that's a broken model. It's not sustainable, to use the buzzword for the evening. So we feel that business has an equal responsibility to its community, to its environment, to its workers, in addition to just purely maximizing financial return. So when we invest, we're very different from a traditional venture firm where they're focused on raising outside capital, making investments, and then all the while that they're in with a portfolio company, they have their eye on a liquidity event or an exit in 3 years or 5 years so they can return capital to the LPs and do the whole thing over again. And the model, if an entrepreneur is focused on some sort of environmental innovation or disruptive technology, oftentimes when you have this gun to your head, for lack of a better term, for short-term growth and profitability, it can be a distraction for that. So that's the biggest differentiator with our investment fund, is that we are in it for the long haul. So I'll throw out just maybe 2 or 3 example investments just to give a little bit of color to the types of companies that we've invested in, and then I'll wrap up. On one of our first investments was in a company called CO2 Nexus. They have a waterless textile cleaning and coating technology system. So we're looking at a lot of different initiatives to pull that technology through into our supply chain for the outdoor apparel side. And just some rough calculations, napkin math, it looks like just for part of the Patagonia line, we could save 3.5 million gallons of water the first year that we roll this out. And then again, our intention is not to just do part of our line, is to open it up, and that's going to obviously have a big impact in terms of water savings. And in California, water savings in the drought is obviously very relevant here. Another company we invested in is Borreo. They're local, based in Southern California. Their model is to source discarded fishing nets at the end of their life and turn them into skateboard decks. So the nylon from the actual fishing nets, they're keeping that out of the ocean. There's some stats on the earlier presentations about ocean plastic pollution. And the research shows that 10% of the ocean plastic pollution is due to discarded fishing gear. So these guys are taking the nets, turning it into a skateboard, and they just launched sunglasses through a Kickstarter campaign. They've got 3 sunglasses that are out there.
Our next speaker, Mark Hines, is the Director of Sustainability at Sonos.
So I think I drew this short straw following the Patagonia guy. Damn. But what I did want to do was sort of take the power of business and try to leverage that into making the world a better place. And I do think that business is the most powerful entity of our day, and there's really not much competition, unfortunately. It's certainly not government, right? I don't think it's NGOs either, and unfortunately, Steve, it's not academia. It's business, right? So how do we take this beast? How do I take this beast and leverage the power of it? And so having just sort of done this stint as a marketing guy and gone to business school, I wanted to sort of take that focus on speaking the business language as opposed to speaking the language that was more natural to me, which is sort of the green language. But when you speak the green language to business people, most business people, they just glaze over. So it's just not advisable. Let's see. There we go. So just as a place to start here, the way that I frame up corporate sustainability or corporate social responsibility in companies is just in terms of these 3 pillars. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they sort of all report into the same department, but these are the issues that companies need to report on in their corporate sustainability reports, assuming they have them. Or to just sort of think about. So this is how we frame it up. And it starts with the human rights and sort of the the people side of things and what goes on in factories, and companies' responsibility to make sure that the workers, even though they're not employed by that company, the contract workers are working in fair and safe conditions. And there's all sorts of tools and things that go on in that space. The second pillar of activity is around the environment, and I sort of break that up for my companies in terms of products and product design, and then buildings and operations. And then there's a community pillar around sort of giving back to the community and putting together corporate philanthropy programs and volunteer programs. And then there's a sort of a horizontal pillar across the bottom here about stakeholder engagement and reporting. So what is it you want to communicate to the world, if anything? And who do you want to engage with? And as we saw earlier, my guess is that Mattel did not do a good job of reaching out to the NGO community, especially Greenpeace, to understand what their issues were. Because when I was at HP, we had the same thing happen, and you really need to proactively reach out to the NGO community if you want to avoid that kind of thing. And that's what that activity there is all about. So my last slide, third and last slide, is kind of empty here, but I try to sort of frame things up for business people in terms of the benefits, the business benefits of sustainability, because this is how business people think, right? They think about money, they think about time, and they don't necessarily know what to do with saving trees and water and energy and stuff like that. I mean, it sounds good, but it's not their language. So I wanted to just list that many of the sustainability programs improve efficiency and save money, and especially when you first start. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Things like LEED certification, energy programs, water programs. I mean, there's a lot of waste out there, and it's pretty easy to sort of show that up front. And it's a good idea to sort of show the money savings. In fact, I almost always lead with the business argument and then sort of throw out the environmental argument as kind of a bonus. And that seems to work well in the business world. Sustainability programs, CSR, corporate social responsibility programs are a great way to attract and retain talent. So lots of millennials expect that companies have programs and have sustainability built into their operations and their products. And so if you don't have that, you really have a hard time attracting the people that you want. And then integrating, enhancing customer experience and improving sales. So green products and packaging also can increase revenues. So there's an easy one there. And the biggest and I think biggest financial impact, and it's almost more of a negative impact, if you take the Mattel example from earlier, is risk management, enhancing the brand and managing risk. So if you don't do a good job of that, as our friends at VW and BP and Exxon locally have found out, there's huge implications for your brand. And I look at what's going on with VW, and it's like, will these guys survive what is happening and still unfolding? I mean, it's massive. And that may not be a financial upside, but if you don't take care of business and take care of your operations and do the ethical thing, there can be a huge negative impact.